This conference will now be recorded.
Hello, everyone. I am so happy to introduce Amy Wagonfeld to everyone, our whole group. Amy, most of the people in this group specialize in home modifications. A good percentage of them have their own businesses. Amy has dedicated herself to the field of inclusive therapeutic landscape design and has just done a wonderful job of significantly enhancing the lives of people throughout their lifespan. She has a background in occupational therapy, human development, and developmental psychology. She's She appreciates the importance of the interdisciplinary approach in designing and programming innovative spaces. The spaces that she crafts foster physical and sensory development, support mental health, and facilitate learning. Amy is the principal of Amy Wagenfeld Design and holds a faculty position at the Landscape Architecture in the Department of Landscape Architecture at the University of Washington, where she actively contributes to academic and professional discourse through publications, presentations, and the intersection of nature, health, and well-being throughout all stages of life. I am so happy to have you here, Amy. One thing that I really feel for the aging in place crowd is making sure that they've got some way of getting out of the house to enjoy the outdoors. My mom has Parkinson's. She's now in a wheelchair, so I just set up her whole deck so that she could roll out there and, be outside and see the animals a little bit. So I
Absolutely.
really appreciate what you're doing. It's so valuable.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen. And thanks for that lovely introduction. And, if all else fails, if you can't get outside, having views of nature from a window also promote health and well-being, and research definitely supports that. Certainly if you can get outside, it's it's optimal, but sometimes we just have to make do. And bravo for you to making it possible for your mom to get outside. That's so important. Karen, again, thank you so much for that really, really lovely invitation. The invitation to join you all tonight, and also for that lovely introduction. Um, yeah, I think you saved me from having to introduce myself. I really identify now if someone says to me, Amy, what are you? And the first thing I always say is, I'm an occupational therapist. I say it with great pride. I love being an occupational therapist. It defines who I am. And for the newer practitioners in the group, you'll find that along the way, you're going to suddenly wake up and realize, I look at the world differently than other people, and not everybody sees the world through the eyes of occupational therapy. And I think that we're so unique and we're so wonderful in the way that we think. And I'm very proud to be an occupational therapist, and I'm really proud to take my skills as an occupational therapist into the world of design. Just by way of just giving you just a little bit of my background history, and I want to tell my story if you all don't mind doing that. And then I'm going to need Karen's help in a few minutes to facilitate a chat discussion. But anyway, um, just sort of, how did I get to this place where I am now? For one thing, in many ways, I think it's been a lifetime journey if you really want to get somewhat melodramatic about it. Because when I was a little girl, a ways back, I my family, when I was 5, we moved from New York to rural Southwest Michigan, which, Karen, I believe that's where you are as well.
Oh,
Um, yep. So I grew up in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and for my parents, who were New York City slickers, um, moving to Southwest Michigan a long time ago was amazing culture shock for them. At the time, the only restaurant in town was Burger King, and and this was the first time we'd ever had a house. We'd always lived in apartments. And so, with great enthusiasm, my parents took on the job of having a house, having a yard, and having a vegetable garden. And their enthusiasm waned after about a week. But 5-year-old Amy just fell in love with the garden. And it was my place to escape, and it was my place to kind of Oh, I keep getting funny messages. It was my place to get away from kind of, the busyness. I'm the oldest of four. It was a busy household, and I would go in the garden, and it was my place to be. And so all my life, I've really gotten and derived great pleasure from being outside and being in nature. And gardening has always been an important part of my life. And so we'll fast forward many decades, and when this is kind of my fun story, and this is where the pieces begin to come together. So when our son was 13 years old, we were living in Boston at the time, and it was one of those beautiful spring afternoons. We desperately awaited after a long winter in Boston, and it was balmy and it was beautiful. And at that time, I was working on my PhD dissertation. I was teaching 3/4 time actually in a psychology department at a small college in the Boston area. I was writing my first occupational therapy assistant pediatric textbook. And I had a small pediatric private practice. Most of my clinical work was with children and their families. And I was planning our son's bar mitzvah. And, in true OT fashion, it's all in a day's work. And I think back then that was nothing compared to what happens in our lives today. But nonetheless, I had a major, major meltdown, and I was yelling and I was screaming, and my son was in the room. We were both in the study doing our respective homework. And it's pretty atypical for me to just lose my cool. And he just stopped working on his computer, and he looked at me, and in the quietest voice possible, he said, "Hey, Mom, why don't you go outside in your garden for a while?" Oh, out of the mouth of babes, if you will. And I stopped ranting and raving, and I just said, "Well, okay." And so I went out into my garden. I was still dressed for teaching, and I was, had on nice shoes and all that. But nonetheless, I went out into the garden, and I spent 20 minutes. And 20 minutes is important. Think about that. That's an important dose of time. And because research really does show that a 20-minute dose of nature, or exponentially about 120 minutes a week in nature, is health promoting. So anyway, in those 20 minutes, I stroked my herbs, I did some weeding, I poked around, I felt the breeze on my shoulders, and the sun was kissing my face, and the clouds were beautiful. And I just breathed, and I breathed, and I breathed. And I realized I feel fine. I'm not tense, I'm not angry, I'm not upset anymore. I feel fine, and I felt restored. And so I went back inside, and I just quietly resumed my work, and all was well. But what happened stuck with me. I'm like, what happened? I wanted to know, what was my experience, and was my experience something that was, just unique to me, or was it something that perhaps can be ascribed to something else, or to some type of a phenomenon? And so I started doing some research, and I discovered a nature and health theory that was developed by the environmental psychologists Stephen and Rachel Kaplan, and it's called the attention restoration theory. And in the attention restoration theory, it's really understood that when we are experiencing prolonged periods of really, really focused attention, like the hours and hours we spend in front of our computers, or if you have a job, perhaps an assembly line type of job, which is very repetitive and very focused, you can become fatigued, and you can become careless, you can become impulsive, you can become angry, you can become aggressive, kind of all of the above for me. And so I thought, oh my gosh, there's a name. But the last part of the attention restoration theory is the way that you can restore, the way that you can kind of get back to being centered is through connections with nature. And for a lot of people, it's being in a garden, or going for a walk, or going to the water, et cetera, et cetera. And so I thought, wow, bingo, this is really, really cool. This is what happened to me. And this is really, really exciting. I want to know more about it. And then I also started to think about, well, I've always loved gardening. And in my clinical practice, I always, whenever I could, I incorporated nature into my practice. It could be, if I could bring children outside, we went outside. If that wasn't possible, in some capacity, nature was brought inside in the form of the different types of interventions that I worked on with children. So I wanted to know, that's interesting. Is there some connection between occupational therapy and nature? So kind of dig back into the archives of occupational therapy and learned really early on, or I needed to be reminded that early on in our profession, we did nature and gardening was an important intervention that we used. And it was primarily with veterans and those with mental health conditions. So that was really cool. So I'm like, okay, there's two really important things that I've learned. And then I began to learn about this thing called therapeutic gardens or healing gardens. And I thought, wow, that's really, really cool. Are these spaces designed to help people to restore, to be able to interact with nature, and to maybe feel better? And so I started to, as I said, I started to learn about who's doing these wonderful design projects. And I certainly learned that it was landscape architects. So I was like, that's pretty really cool. And who are these landscape architects? Began to learn who's doing, the work. And this was like close to, oh my gosh, 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago. It's certainly become much more prevalent and common in practice now in landscape architecture. But anyway, what really surprised me was that in healing gardens and therapeutic gardens, the gardens were not being designed in collaboration with therapists. And being an occupational therapist, I was like, that's interesting. And so it became sort of my quest, because I personally felt such connections with nature. It became kind of my quest to work to develop relationships with landscape architects to help to design these cool spaces. And so, kind of in a nutshell, about 20 years later, I think that the process is starting to happen. I'm hearing of more and more occupational therapists or occupational therapy practitioners who are collaborating with landscape architects to design therapeutic outdoor environments. And so it is a bummer. What I thought I would do is, I guess I'm just going to tell you about some of the projects that I'm working on. And but first, let me back up and say that along the way, one of the coolest things that happened, and it is with, I think, because of an early relationship that I developed with a professor of landscape architecture at the University of Washington, that I got my faculty appointment in the department. And so I teach half-time in the department, and some of the courses that I teach, I co-teach landscape architecture design studio courses. I don't teach them on my own. I don't have the landscape architecture, some of the skills necessary to teach it on my own. But that's fine, because the students really benefit from having this interprofessional collaboration model for their course instructors. So I co-teach design studio classes primarily with the landscape architect with whom I wrote a book, which is Therapeutic Gardens, Designed for Healing Spaces. So that brought me into the department. And on my own, I teach seminar classes, and my seminar classes are intentionally designed to be interdisciplinary. So I get this incredible mix of students actually throughout the entire university. So certainly I have primarily design students. I have architecture students, I have landscape architecture students, I have urban planning students, and I'll get a sprinkling of other students. Public health, I've had some occupational therapy students in my seminar classes, and I'll tell you about what those topics are in a moment. This past quarter, I had a couple of computer science students, which was really, really fun. They really brought an interesting perspective to class. And as you can see, I'm not super tech savvy, and they often saved my life. I have students from public health, nutrition, museum studies, so it's really fun. And my studio or my seminar topic classes are primarily therapeutic related. That's the only directive I have from the department chair, is that they have some therapeutic, oh, thanks, Karen. Thanks, therapeutic quality to them. So I've developed and taught therapeutic design, a seminar on that. A class that's really, really popular is a course on sensory responsive design, and who better to teach a class on the sensory systems and an occupational therapist. And another course that I've developed and was very fun but exhausting because we're on 10-week quarters is human development for designers. Designers are not schooled in human development, which I think is a very necessary skill if you're designing for projects for people across the lifespan. So we had a lot of fun in that class. And in the span of 10 weeks, we went from birth to end of life, all through the eyes of a design project. So that's really cool. So that's my teaching part of my life. My other part of my life is my work as Amy Wagonfeld Design. And I also write, and remind me at the end to tell you about a really cool grant that I just got. So my thoughts, I'm going to just have to just tell you about some of my projects, and then hopefully, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Those aren't going to be super helpful for projects, Karen. Sorry. Although I'd forgotten about that. So nice to look at that. One of the coolest projects, well, I think all of my projects are the coolest. Everyone I work on is always the best at the moment. One of the projects that I'm working on right now is called the Joy Evans Therapeutic Recreation Center. And that is, the original site was it was built in the 1970s and really pretty beat up and well past its prime. So working collaboratively with the DLR group of Washington, D.C., we redesigned the building. It's on a 7-acre campus in the Anacostia neighborhood of Washington, D.C., which, if those of you who know Washington, D.C., it's a rather underserved neighborhood. So the Therapeutic Recreation Center is intended to be a space for children and adults with developmental and intellectual challenges, for those with sensory challenges. It also has a senior center, and the site itself is 7 acres, and there's a lot of wooded land on the site. And so our garden, and you may be able to, if you go online, I think there may be some drawings online. Again, it's the Joy Evans Therapeutic Recreation Center project. And that's been we're just about done. And just 2 weeks ago, I had the privilege of co-presenting at the American Institute of Architects conference, which was in DC, and our presentation was a tour of the center. It's not quite done, it's not open yet, but it's coming along beautifully, and it's this beautiful representation of a pavilion in the woods, if you will. And the whole intention of this space is really, really based on biophilia, the idea that humans need to be connected with nature for optimal health and well-being. And because I worked with the DLR group from the process of actually writing the proposal to present to the DC Department of Parks and Recreation, to be at the interview, and with every aspect of the project from the very, very beginning. So I was able to contribute to landscape, to architecture, and to interior design. The facility is, it's absolutely stunningly beautiful. I know when I saw it a couple of weeks ago, and it has just really great features that everyone who's involved with the project, as well as in the District of Columbia, is really, really excited about. And even, shout out to OT, is that I designed a sensory room for the space. I didn't have to advocate super hard to get it. And it, just like the rest of the building, which really, really optimizes connections with nature, so too does the sensory room. So this is go ahead, question?
I just said that's awesome.
Oh,
That
yeah.
you could put in a sensory area as well.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And when we did our tour a couple of weeks ago, it was all architects who were on the tour. They were super like, oh my gosh, this is great. Now, a couple of things about the center. It's the only one in sort of the metro DC area. And what we're really, really hoping is that it really becomes a showcase for what a therapeutic recreation center should be. So we're very, very excited about it. And yeah, so that's one of the big projects. Another project that I'm working on right now, and you won't be able to find a whole lot of information because we're just kind of gearing up in early design process. It is a women's prison in North Dakota. For some reason, I have done a lot of research on the importance of greening prison environments, and so I was brought in on this project to be an integral part of the team. So yeah, that one's just getting underway. Again, it's a project with the DLR group, but with their Minneapolis office. Excuse me for just a moment. And again, this was a project in which I helped to write the proposal, and all the way through the interview. And now we're in the design development phase of the project. I'm just kind of looking at I'm kind of looking at my PowerPoint. Sorry to be looking off to the side here. Another project that's been really important and very gratifying for me is a project. It's a mission-based project in Uganda, and I worked with a design firm in California. I do a lot of work with this firm. They one of their specialties is inclusive play space design. So I've done a number of projects with this group. And anyway, they were invited to design a playground at the GEM school in Kaliri Wasaku, Uganda. And this is it's a residential school for children of all ages with all types of disabilities. They're kind of all just there together. And so this was a really great project because we really had to rely on very limited resources and essentially no budget to do the project. I had not been on site for the project, but worked, from the beginning through design, through even helping to, how in the moment, how do we modify such and such in order to meet the needs of the children? So, the intention of this playground at the GEM Village school is that it's as inclusive as possible for all the children to enjoy the opportunities to be outside. Another area, again, I'm just kind of zooming around here on my PowerPoint. Another area of significant interest for me is the whole idea, and I think that, for those of you who are, in clinical practice, you're hearing a lot about trauma responsive care. And in design, I think maybe you've perhaps heard about this too, there's beginning to be a lot of interest in trauma-informed design. And I think that who better to help support these types of projects than an occupational therapist. So I worked with a design firm in Boston, and this was a project. It was the Massachusetts Department of Children and Family Services to develop a trauma-informed design toolkit.
There's a stake in the.
Sorry?
I'm sorry, nothing.
Okay. So I'm just really, it's hard to, I really apologize, having never done GoToMeeting. I'm good at Zoom and getting better at Teams. So my apologies for any type of lag in communication or such. But anyway, so that's been really cool, is that this trauma-informed design toolkit is intended to help with how do you design visitation facilities, for children who are in the care of, the Department of Children and Family Services. It's a place for visitation, for reunification, and how do you, through the lens of a trauma-informed design approach, how do you create spaces and environments that help to, support very harmed or very damaged relationships. So that was a really fun project, and it was really great, again, to be brought in as an occupational therapist to contribute to the toolkit.
So real quick, Amy, when you're designing for, say, therapeutic design for, kids who've gone through trauma, what kinds of things do you do? I mean, are there any general principles or concepts that you base it on?
Well, if we put on our OT hats and we think about it, it's very sensory based. And that's something that I work really hard with my design teams to, as best they can understand, the importance of really acknowledging how our sensory systems impact every single thing that we do in our lives. So that's a huge part of my work. And also, I always, dive back into the nature and health theories, the attention restoration theory. How do you design to provide for optimal nature experiences and such? So good question. Good question. And how do you design environments that will hopefully reduce stress?
And just real quick, when you do a design, say for children who've been through trauma,
Mhm.
do you typically have predominantly plants, or do you pull in different sorts of
That's a good question.
playground structures? How does that work?
It varies. It varies based on, who is the client. It varies on, in some ways, what is it that they want. But the wisdom in therapeutic design, and I will say that there is no evidence to support it. It's just sort of this wisdom, is that the most health promoting outdoor spaces are those that are 70% plant material, 30% built. Again, there's no evidence that supports it, but it's sort of this formula that many people ascribe to. So yeah, we try to do as many plants as possible, but also thinking about what's safe, what's appropriate, who is going to be using the space. Also have to think about maintenance. If what does a poorly maintained garden say? It says we don't care. So having to be realistic about what's going to be there. And in terms of playground equipment too, it depends. Is it something, does the client have the budget to support manufactured playground equipment and that's it, or can we expand into more of a natural play area? What is the client's, one of the things in design of outdoor spaces that hasn't been cracked yet is how do you create an inclusively designed nature-based play space. It's pretty tough. So, some design firms are really working hard on it. So again, it very much varies, but Karen, that's a really good question. But yeah, try to make it as nature-centric as possible. And interesting that you say that, because one really, really cool project that I worked on with the same firm that I worked on with the trauma-informed design toolkit is they were the lead firm to renovate an existing facility. And it's important to understand for all of you who have children and the daycare center, Bright Horizons, that company, probably do. Hopefully there's some nods. Yes, we know Bright Horizons. Yes. Okay. Bright Horizons nonprofit is called Horizons for Homeless Children. And the headquarters is in the Dorchester neighborhood in Boston. And so the firm that I worked with had a longstanding relationship with Bright Horizons, and so the idea of Horizons for Homeless Children is that it's a daycare center, as well as there's some also some adult meeting spaces, but it's a daycare center that's exclusively for children whose families are unhoused. So think about it. These are children who are, this is a major ACEs, homelessness, poverty. These are ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, or child trauma. And so I worked with the team on both inside and outside space. I'll get to nature in a second. And it was absolutely abundantly clear that this space had to be certainly designed through the lens, a trauma-informed design lens, and to also be a place where children who were, for the most, many of them dysregulated, to be able to regulate, to have choice, to have different zones, active zones, quiet zones. Now, here's the nature piece. The Horizons for Homeless Children, the building, it's a very urban building, and the garden is actually on the roof. Okay, don't worry, kids cannot jump. No worries about that. The fences are very high, the railings are very, very high. But because of weight load issues, there's actually a limited amount of nature. It's just, we have raised beds, little child-sized raised beds for the children to do some gardening, but there's not a whole lot of plants. So have to, again, this is just one example where, yeah, it would have been fantastic to have a very immersive garden experience, but the reality was we couldn't, have a lot of gardens because the weight of having lots of soil on the roof. But it's a very highly successful place, and just been a really great project. I'm going to tell you about, and then I want to just allow you to just ask me questions. I think that's probably the best thing since you can't see pictures. I'm going to talk about a project that I've always held it very, very, very close to my heart, and the garden is, gosh, about 7 or 8 years old now. It's called the L's for Autism Sensory Arts Garden. Now, if any of you are golfers, Ernie Els, does that mean anything to golfers in the group? It meant nothing to me, I'm embarrassed to say. So Ernie Els was like a very, well, I guess he still is, a very famous golfer, has won many international championships. And just a little aside there, thank you. When I told my husband about, I'm going to be helping to design a garden at the, Els for Autism Center of Excellence, he's like, Ernie Els? I'm like, yeah. He goes, do you not know who he is? I'm like, no, I don't, honey. Sorry. I said, I was just in Ernie's office today. He's really tall and his chairs are really big, and I didn't fit well because I'm actually very small. But anyway, so Ernie and his wife Liesel have a son, Ben, and Ben has autism. And so their nonprofit is focused exclusively on advances and excellence in services for people with children and adults with autism. And one of their home base, their centers, is in Jupiter, Florida, which is the northern part of Palm Beach County. And so I worked with the Els for Autism Foundation to obtain about a $500,000 grant through the Florida Cultural Facilities Office to design a garden, a sensory garden, so on their Center of Excellence campus. And on this Center of Excellence campus, there's two no-fee charter schools. There's now an adult residential facility. There's, of course, a golf course. There's a pool. There's schools. There's office buildings and an auditorium and conference center. There's an arts pavilion. There's playgrounds. And of course, now there's a garden, a sensory garden, and it's a courtyard garden. It's fully enclosed because certainly children and adults with autism, they have an increased risk for elopement. So the Els for Autism Sensory Arts Garden is, and that you definitely can find online, as Karen is beautifully wandering through some of the images. Karen, if you also went to, the design firm is Dirtworks PC, you might be able to find it. So this is a garden. I worked very, very closely from the beginning with the design firm. So I helped get the grant, and then we, through a series of evaluating proposals, we chose Dirtworks as our firm. And so I had the privilege of working on the design with them. And it's very, very sensitively designed to meet the needs of children and adults with autism. There's a lot of predictability. There's a lot of repetition. It's inclusively designed so that no matter where you are in the garden, what you need to do, you can do it. The garden tells you what to do. There's no need for extra explanations or signage. All 8 of the sensory systems were accounted for. There's zones that are active. There's zones that are very quiet. There's places for retreat. It's been a very, very highly successful garden. It's won a lot of awards. And, I hadn't been there in many years, and I was there last year, and I was just pleased how it's grown up beautifully. And it's a treasured place in the garden. I remember being there on opening day, and some of the children were out in the garden, and I remember hearing one say, can we come here every day? And the children who attend the schools, they are in the garden every day for 20 minutes. The schedules rotate. And so they do have the opportunity. And one really important thing is we also designed the garden so that the sight lines are such that no matter where staff are standing in the garden, they can see the entire expanse of the garden, so that children, there's no prescribed plans. Children make their own, they create their own journey in the garden. There's nothing structured because, you know, for the most part, their school days are very, very highly structured. So it's a wonderful getaway time for them. I mean, I could talk forever, but I want to have a conversation with you.
Thank
Yeah.
you. This is just beautiful.
Yeah.
Let's just take a quick break, and anybody who has any questions or anything that they want to bring up, please speak up. But
Well,
this
then
is
I want to
beautiful.
tell you about a grant because it kind of involves OTs. But anyway, yeah. You know, if you stop right there, okay, and I don't know, can you see my cursor? Can you see my cursor spinning around? Probably not. Okay. Karen, can you spin around on yeah, exactly. Okay. This, thank you. Um, this was one of my early sort of inspirations, if you will, this side of the garden and the parallel, you know, the vertical axis of the garden represents a series of what we called places away, and the places away are intentionally the quiet sort of nook spaces, and each space beginning sort of at the front of the garden and working your way back becomes increasingly more immersive in nature and quieter. And one of the things that I thought would be so cool to have in some of the places away was what we call pebble paving. And I think probably you've seen this at many different sensory gardens. So this is a series of, we went a little different here, of different sized river rocks that are embedded in concrete, and they're just protruding, you know, less than a half an inch, so that you get a little bit of interesting proprioceptive input, tactile, you know, even a little bit of vestibular input. And then we thought, okay, well, we have to have seating in these spaces. And if you look really, really carefully, and this is, you know, part of the OT thinking in my brain, is that I really recognize that some children, because that's what's in the picture, would want to be deep in these spaces, and that sensory experience would be positive for them, but others might not want to, but they still wanted to be part of being in the space. So we purposely, you know, cited these huge rock chairs, so that there's a solitary space. If someone wants to be by themselves, purposely seats next to each other for potential conversation, but because they're horizontal and not facing each other, you don't have to talk to each other. The opportunity to go, why I'm moving my cursor, I'm talking to my cursor, to go all the way into the garden, or into this places away for a, you know, child who or an adult who wants that experience. But also, if you can see the little boy with the green shirt, his feet are outside of the pebble paving and on just
Oh,
irregular concrete because he's not comfortable with his feet in the space. But it allows this opportunity. It's this inclusive opportunity to be part of this space. So again, it's a great garden. I recently saw the lead landscape architect with whom I worked on the project, and we both just have the fondest memories. And of course, oh, this was a great design mistake that we made. This was fabulous. The swing is wildly popular. We purposely have these cool stepping stones so that it's, you know, a little bit of a proprioceptive and a vestibular challenge to get back to this yummy vestibular swing experience. So popular is the swing that within just a month or two after the garden opened, the kids with their feet, you know, pumping and such, they dug a trench under the swing. We hadn't even thought about that. So we went back in, and now that there's a deck underneath. So problem solved. But yeah, we forgot about that. So mistakes at work. This was installed after, when the funds were raised. The wall of water was installed about 2 years after the garden opened. The foundation was able to raise the funding. So it's a wall of water, and it's wildly popular, particularly in South Florida where it's so hot all the time. So great garden.
yes, that's beautiful.
Yeah, thanks for showing the pictures, Karen. I appreciate that.
Yeah, Sheila says she loves how the stone seats look like dinosaur eggs.
Well, that's actually what they're called.
Oh,
Bravo, Sheila. And there's spaces to work, and there's spaces to play, and there's spaces again to create your own journey. Um, kind of one of the funny stories. Oh, I can see if we can keep scrolling and see if we can find some. Keep going. Is there more? Yeah. Okay. Right there. Oh, well, okay. sorry, Karen, can you go back down just a little bit? So one of the things one more. There you go. You can't quite see all of it, but the vertical axis of the garden is a series of the 5 basic sense gardens, and each of the beds are filled with plants that represent one of the 5 basic senses. We had a little challenge with sound because things grow so quickly in Florida. The first thing you think about is, oh, bamboo. Bamboo clicks and makes cool sounds in the wind, but bamboo grows like a foot a day in South Florida. So we're like, that can't work. So what we did was we came up with just using very small instruments that kids could make noise with or to activate, and they're portable, so they plant them all over the garden. So that was how we dealt with sound. It was an absolute mandate, and one that we as a team fully supported, was that every single plant in the garden be safe. There was no toxicity risk because who knows what's going to go in someone's mouth. And so many of the plants that we had originally selected for really varied sensory interests had some type of toxicity risk, so they were just canned. But yeah, so again, we just want this it's a space for children to be their best selves, and they find their spaces. So and just anecdotally, in the smell bed, there you go, that's a better picture. In the smell bed, we planted lemon verbena, which for you gardeners, it's the most lemony of all the herbs, and rather popular with the children. It gets ravaged almost on a weekly basis, but the staff is like, that's fine, that's cool. They just replace it because it is so delicious. But anyway, let me just tell you a little bit about a grant I got, and then I really welcome any questions that you have. So about 6 weeks ago, I in collaboration with my colleague, psychiatrist, Dr. Wesley Tate, we submitted a proposal to the REI Cooperative Action Fund to partner with an organization that they support called the Nature and Health Alliance, and to create, as part of the Nature and Health Alliance, something called the Learning Network. And if you read Community, I posted the press release. So the Learning Network is intended to be a place. We're not, it's not on, we're in development. But if you Nature and Health Alliance, that will come up. We're working with a web designer right now for our part on the website. So the Nature and Health Alliance it's a convening space, if you will, at this point, basically for research and the nature and health research. It's a fantastic organization. I'm a member of it. I highly recommend, if you're interested in nature and health research, to join, but you certainly can look at the research that's been posted there. And our idea was, that is really, really terrific, and that is all well and good, but where is this space for practitioners who are facilitating nature-focused programming? And so what we proposed was that the Learning Network would be that database, if you will, of case studies of nature-based therapy programs, and also of spaces, nature therapeutic outdoor spaces. And again, it's the idea, and I'm just saying this in a super abbreviated nutshell because I want to give you guys time to chat, is the idea is that certainly it's a space for practitioners to go to meet, if you will, again, virtually, but it's also, our idea is, how do you bring research and practice together? And that's going to be through the network. So we're super excited about it. And if you have any interest in learning more about it, please reach out, particularly capstone students. So that's my story in a nutshell.
Thank you so much. It's so interesting.
It is interesting. And, occupational therapy really has a voice in nature and health. And, from my research brain, I'm seeing more and more articles that are being published by occupational therapist studies of, using nature in clinical practice. And, we have a lot to say. And I think that we need to be an important part of the conversation. So not only in design, but in, creating the evidence to support connections with nature.
Great.
Yeah.
I've got a comment, Karen, if I may, or Amy. This is Sheila,
Yeah.
and I live in Asheville, North Carolina, which is a beautiful part of the country, close to a lot of waterfalls and outdoor spaces. It's gorgeous. But anyway, another colleague and I have just bought a 14-passenger van, wheelchair accessible van, and we've started a company called Blue Ridge Elder Adventures.
Oh,
And we're focusing on nature-based activities for our elders.
I love it.
Yeah, and we've just started in May, but it was a nursing home that I had used to work for. We're selling off their van to raise some capital, so we got it for a really good price, low mileage, and we don't need a CDL driver if it's less than 14, though we have one. But anyway, but we're taking. We had this last week, like 2 women over 100 years old that live in this nursing home and just said they just felt like they would probably never be able to really get out in nature anymore. And we have a Facebook page for BRIA, is the acronym, Blue Ridge Elder Adventures, BRIA, and a website too. But just the faces of these ladies that were, out in nature, and some with low vision, but they still could we had some great guides at like this arboretum we went to, and at another nature center that had some guides, but anyway, some docents that talked about the plants and the flowers.
Oh,
so,
Sheila, that's wonderful.
You're creating the spaces, but we're trying to bring people to the spaces.
Well, absolutely. And Sheila, will you reach out to me, please? Because I think you may need to be one of our case studies on our learning network.
I know. I was thinking with what you're saying about how to do the research. Like, I know we certainly could do questionnaires before and after, but I was trying to think of another way too to gather data. Yeah, there's our bus. There's our bus full of people. That was actually a trial run we did with a bunch of my friends, but 2 of them are in their 80s in the second row, and we took them on a pontoon boat ride. There's a lake lure that has a boat ride, and then we just had a beautiful day out in nature on this lake.
I think that's fantastic. And these are just the kinds of examples that we're looking to feature in the Learning Network, programs that help people to be able to connect with nature at all periods of life. And again, sort of the whole idea is that, we're really hoping that researchers and practitioners through the Nature and Health Alliance and the Learning Network of the Nature and Health Alliance are going to be able to connect. Because often what happens is research happens somewhat in isolation, and research and practice need to connect so that it becomes more translational. So
yes,
reach out to me, Sheila, please.
Okay, I will, Amy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Does anyone else have any questions or thoughts or?
So we just recently started an autism task force, and what we're doing is we're getting funding to do occupational therapy evaluations that include sensory evaluation, functional evaluation, and behavioral evaluation, and then using Medicaid waiver dollars, predominantly also some trust fund dollars, to create places within the home that are set and out in the yard, hopefully, that are sensory regulating, different things to prevent elopement, multisensory rooms. There's just so much research out there about how multisensory rooms and multisensory spaces help to keep people with autism out of the emergency room, and how dysregulating and traumatic the emergency room can be.
Of course.
So, yeah, and I would love to just to pick your brain on some of this. So if I don't know, does anyone have any questions Otherwise, I'm going to start asking her about autism gardens.
Sure, sure.
Can I jump in and ask a question real quick?
Anyone can
Have at
ask.
it, Kendall.
Hi, my name's Kendall. I'm driving on I-10 right now, so I won't turn my camera on, and I hope I don't
Right,
lose
mine
you.
doesn't work, or mine actually sort of works. No.
But I just thought it was very interesting what you were saying about working with the, in Texas it's called CPS, but the Children's Protective Services for the foster children. As a previous foster parent, I've walked into those spaces a lot, and they are the most depressing places you'll ever be because of what's going on. But then the environment is just so yucky.
Right, and
Um,
yeah.
and so I was just wanting more details, if you could provide any, about how you were even able um, to find funding or to acquire funding to even get something like that done. There's just, they spend all the money, right, on other very important things, but there's none left over to make the waiting room or the rooms where they meet with their families very
Well, yeah,
welcoming.
no, I fully agree. And, to be absolutely transparent about it, this was a toolkit, our that, hopefully, that would lead to opportunities for design projects. But, this was, these are like design guidelines for what you can do in the spaces. The hope was, and this was, completed relatively recently, and just like in all government agencies, things move slowly. So but the funding to even develop the toolkit, it was just sort of this fortuitive. It was funded in part by the previous governor's wife, who was very interested and very supportive of children and children's initiatives. So it was kind of through funding, kind of directed through her, that the it was even made available to develop the funding to create the toolkit. But sure, it'd be terrific to see it change, because talk about trauma on top of environmental trauma. I mean, it's terrible. One of the kind of crushing projects that I worked on, again with the same firm, is we were invited to design an outdoor play area for a visitation center for children in the foster care system in Texas, no, not Texas, Nevada, in Reno, Nevada. And it was such a fantastic garden. And, we really tapped into, thinking about trauma, very sensory based, also really tapped into thinking about it. How can you, through an environment, help to repair, shattered or very damaged attachment relationships between the biological mother or father and children. And unfortunately, it wasn't funded, and that was crushing. And so that now the visitations continue to exist inside in a very clinical setting rather than outside in a beautiful, nature rich environment. And it was very nature rich plan, but it was kind of a crushing, like, but that happens. No funding.
Sure, yeah. That's encouraging to me, because when you were talking earlier, I was like, oh, they could use that space on the back, and they could have an outside area that they could have the option to go to when it's not 105.
Right.
But
Right.
anyways,
Yep.
just to think outside the box. And you're right, OTs are very good at doing that. So
We are out very good out, and because if we think about our OT theories and the person, environment, occupation, performance model, that says it all. Designers, and you all know, being in this world, designers, kind of are trained to understand a person and environment relationship, and that's all well and fine. But it's much more than that. It's how do you create the environments for people to be able to engage or perform or participate in occupations that are meaningful for them. And that's I think the dimension that we add to the design world is that understanding. And I teach all of my design students the PEOP model, and they're like, yeah, that's really cool. So, because we understand how much the environment really impacts our ability to lead our lives.
So I'm completely ignorant. What's the PEOP model?
Oh, it's Christensen and oh my God, why am I blanking on her name? Someone rescue me on this one.
Carolyn Baum.
Thank you very much. Apologies, Carolyn. It's a model of practice in which, it's sort of intersecting circles that, coalesce in the middle in terms of participation, so that when you have this good fit between the person and the environment and capacity to engage in occupation, then all is well in the world. But that's a very watered down explanation. But I think it's really very defining, and I think it definitely guides the work that I do in design. When I think about, does this environment allow people to do what they want and need to do? It can be a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful space, but that's where it ends. And this is, it could be an indoor, an architectural space, or it could be a landscape. But if you can't, do what you want and need to do, then it's just a beautiful artifact.
I never heard of it as PEOP before. That's not what they called it back in the day when I was in school.
No, I got you beat. I got you beat, Karen. It was PEO in our day. Again, Carolyn, please forgive me. Yeah, boom. Yeah, but yeah. So what guides my work? PEOP, the nature and health theories, sensory integration, universal design, all of these things. I think about all of that when I'm designing or helping to design. So, are there more questions? I have plenty of time, so don't rush.
Hi, I have a question.
Hi, Faith.
So I'm an occupational therapy student,
Fabulous.
and one of my placements was in home modifications.
Awesome.
And so I've become very interested in giving people access in their own environments.
You got it.
And so I'm wondering, sorry, there's a little bit of like echoing going on that's making it hard for me to pay attention to what I'm saying.
Should I mute myself, or is that the problem?
You're not echoing for us. You're only echoing for you.
It might help.
All right. I'm going to mute and remind. Go for it, Faith.
Sorry. Thank you so much. So I'm just wondering, I've heard you talk a lot about creating these spaces and bringing these spaces to the people who need them. But I'm just wondering, do you know anything about modifications or devices that could allow people access to the spaces that they already have, such as their yards or gardens, whether that be a special wheelchair or even a grant that you could apply to get access for your client, anything like that?
Karen, I'm going to kind of defer to you on that one. And it's a very good question, and thank you for asking it, Faith, and thank you for being an OT student. Bravo. In terms of, access, residential access to outdoor spaces, well, first and foremost, you heard Karen say that she enables, she did some whatever modifications you did to make it possible for mom to go from inside to her deck. Okay, and to enjoy nature. Well, and you can bring nature to the deck. You can have a raised bed on the deck if the deck will support it. Or you can have container plantings or plants, set on a table that a wheelchair could just roll right underneath. And those are beautiful ways to connect people with nature. You don't have to have, an at grade or, at the ground garden to be able to, there's certainly other ways to enjoy the joys of gardening. In fact, on my porch, I'm in Colorado right now, on the porch at our condo here, I have a raised bed on my porch so that I don't have any grass, so I can have my plants, but they're all dying. And so hot. But yeah. So in terms of grants, Karen, I'm going to let you jump in on this one.
I don't know of a lot of grants. I know that because I work, a lot with personal injury, auto no fault, and workers' comp. And so a lot of times I will recommend something like an all-terrain wheelchair. There's a Magic Mobility 3 all-terrain wheelchair that can go on the beach. It can go in the woods. I have somebody who takes it out to look through for morel mushrooms. The other thing is there's the Trionic all-terrain walker. That's about $1,800. But again, the people, all of a sudden people can get out and they can walk through a field or walk on the beach. Just those sorts of things, that just those mobility devices is the only experience I've had. And,
Yeah.
we're getting trust funds and that sort of thing to pay for them.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and there are devices out there, even in terms of, there's something called a Moby mat that's often laid out on a beach, so that instead of walking on sand, it's this mat, kind of a resilient mat. And I've seen them in gardens. Yeah, there's a perfect picture of one. But in terms of, personal funding, that's not an area of expertise for me. So I apologize, Faith, that I can't give you a good answer to that. But, certainly, communities seek funding for things like this. You'll see them at, different beaches. And, in fact, I was in San Diego relatively recently, and there was a Moby mat on the dog beach, as a matter of fact. So the dogs were spending most of their time on the Moby mats.
Thank you so much for answering my question. I love the idea of accessibility for morel hunting and for letting people go on doggy beaches.
Absolutely. Absolutely. People, nature isn't just, it's not exclusive. Nature has to be for everybody.
Yeah, these Moby mats are pretty nice.
They're pretty cool. There's a physical therapist in Kennebunkport, Maine, who worked with the town officials to get funding to have a Moby mat installed on a public beach in Kennebunkport.
Yeah.
It's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, it would be nicer to get something like this rather than expect people to get their own devices.
Sure.
But I work on the other end.
Absolutely. I think it's fantastic. I think that what you all do is so important. Are there any other questions? I mean, feel free just to ask me anything.
Hello, my name is Annika, and I'm an OT student right now.
Where do you go to school? Where are you?
What was that?
Where do you? Oh, psst.
Sorry.
No. Okay. Where are you in school, Annika?
I'm at Chatham University in Pittsburgh.
Great.
How do you suggest that I get involved in like sensory gardens and kind of the areas that you were talking about, I guess, for capstone?
Well, in terms of, are you asking about design? That I can't really give you a good answer for that. Certainly, if you're interested as a capstone project in contributing to helping to develop our database, which in part does look at design, we'd be happy to have a conversation with you and your capstone coordinator, my co-director and I. But in terms of design, and this is something that I say to, and never to be discouraging, because this is not something that I or any single OT, and I think Karen will fully agree with me, that not one of us owns. We as a profession need to own this, and to acknowledge our important contribution to design, our capacity. But what I always recommend to young OTs or newly minted OTs is to practice, and to practice for a while. Gain your skills, gain your clinical skills. I think it really helps you to become more confident and competent in contributing to design. I'd been in practice for, a long time. Probably close to 20 years before I even started toe dipping into design. And, I think that, my work with, primarily with children and their families, although I certainly have, worked with all age groups, I think it helped me particularly to be really, really super confident with children's garden designs. And then, as I said, I've somehow oddly fallen into a prison outdoor space design. And so I feel called upon a lot for that now. It's just kind of an odd meeting of all kinds of things. But Annika, I mean, I think that for now, I don't know that a capstone is I don't know. I haven't heard of any, but certainly to learn as much as you possibly can about sensory design and to always be thinking about, even in your mind, how can you apply your understanding of the 8 sensory systems into design projects, as kind of the precursor to, after some time in practice, it's kind of starting to think about how can you approach design firms and say, what's going on, or to see what's going on in your community. Are there any, design projects that are happening that, you could, serve on an advisory board for? But as I said, you had any interest in, what we're doing in the learning network, please feel free, you and your capstone coordinator, feel free to reach out.
Thank you
I
so
put
much.
Amy,
Very
I put
welcome.
Amy's contact information in the chat box.
Thank you, since that was part of my presentation, saying please reach out.
I have one more question. This is Kendall again.
Hi, Kendall.
Just as the expert in the room, um, when you look out at residential um, houses and places and where people live, what are things that stick out to you that you go, oh, that was missed? Man, how did somebody not see that as far as accessibility in the natural world that we try to create within our
Sure.
homes and in our cities?
Sure. Well, I will say that I have done very little residential design work. I just met an architect at the AIA conference who does residential work, and we'll be doing some things together. But what will I see? I might see. Okay, I'm just going to take this as an example, and this is I might see a home that has a ramp. Okay. And then I'll see no modifications to the yard. So there's no, there's a ramp to go perhaps from the driveway up to the front door or to the back door, whatever it is, but there's no paving throughout the yard to enable someone, who's using some type of a mobility device to easily traverse the yard. Okay, so that's sort of, to me, it's like, well, you can get in and out of your house, but as even as Karen was talking about at the beginning, you can't necessarily enjoy a yard. So that's one example. Or even if perhaps there are opportunities to move about the yard, the plantings aren't at a level that's easy to access or safe to access. Yeah, I would say that's a big thing. Or not being, yeah. But definitely something that I'm interested in learning more about and becoming more involved with is residential design, because perhaps if you can't venture further than your home, at least make your home a place that that's not only accessible inside, but that you have the capacity to, if you choose, to enjoy being outside.
Thank you so much. Yeah, my mind just swirls around that. How could I not ask you that question? So thank you.
I'm glad that you asked it. Well, if there's no more questions, oh, please. I'm sorry.
Thank you for this great presentation, and just to be able to hear all of the different places that you're being able to use your OT lens. What recommendations would you have to us therapists across the country, how we can kind of how can we clone you? How can we replicate, the kind of conversations and opportunities you've cultivated so we can, make our prison spaces greener, or we can use best practices to work in other spaces you've mentioned? Do you have any recommendations for that?
Well, first of all, I love the language you're using, Bethany, and it's we OTs. I've spent the past probably about almost 20 years trying to to begin to open the door for, pardon me, for I will say most of my work is in landscape, but I'm increasingly doing more architectural projects. It's just kind of an interesting transition. But landscape is near and dear to my heart. And so I've worked really, really hard to begin to build a bridge between occupational therapy and landscape architecture. And my recommendation is to learn as much as you can, if landscape is your passion, to learn as much as you possibly can about therapeutic outdoor environments, or certainly to read the research about, the health benefits of nature. And then to just really say, okay, well, I see that how can you see this through the lens of occupational therapy, and how can you present yourself to designers in a way that is never defensive, but is very collegial. And I will say that early in my work, I did pro bono projects working with design firms to say, hey, I'd like to learn from you, and I'd like, maybe, in turn, we can learn from each other. And that kind of began to build my portfolio to reach out. I mean, the other thing too is to think about, even in your clinical practice, if perchance, you're practicing, your practice is in the justice system, and, in juvenile justice or in prison systems, well, you're functioning as an occupational therapist, but how can you begin? And again, I'm going to talk in terms of landscape because that's kind of more my thing, except now the big prison project. But how can you, as a therapist, begin to integrate nature into your practice, and in turn, just begin to sort of to begin to build up the bridges to connect with, those who have decision making capacities to say, okay, well, maybe I'm using nature in my practice, but how can we have a space that will foster more than my individual clinical practice with people in the prison system. The same thing as if you're a school-based practitioner, how can you begin to, can you be on a garden team to help to bring a garden to your school? And how can you help to, how can you use your OT brain to help to create these outdoor spaces? Again, that's what I'm focusing on, that will meet the needs of, the children that you're working with on your caseload, but all children. So I think it's just kind of a matter of, feeling confident about your clinical skills, and then beginning to say, well, how can I contribute to creating not only working with children, but helping to create these environments that are health promoting. I don't think I have a secret sauce. I mean, I would definitely share it if I do. I think it's just been an enormous amount of persistence and stubbornness to say, this is what I believe. I believe that occupational therapy has a role, and to just not to give up. I mean, did I have doors slammed in my face when I first started putting myself out there? Absolutely. But, I just know, and I still know in my heart, that we have such an important voice in design and modifications, and that, it's becoming more increasingly mainstream. So keep at it.
Thank you for sure.
Of course. And I wish I had a great answer for you. And I know I was anticipating this question, and I've been thinking about it all day, and it's just been, I mean, I won't give up. And certainly there were times, but I was like, nope, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. And certainly within the world of landscape architecture, occupational therapy is no longer this like weirdo word. What the heck is that? I mean, I'm very actively involved with the American Society of Landscape Architects. And, most conversations are like, oh, and what about occupational therapy? So, we're out there.
I feel like we're coming into our own because of people like you, Amy, who
and you, Karen,
who weren't gonna step back and say, okay, you gotta do your thing. It's just, no, I'm gonna be here too, and this is my frame of reference is important.
Absolutely.
Right.
And yeah, absolutely. And let's listen to each other. And there's so much emphasis now on interprofessional practice, in in the world of allied health. But I really like to think of my interprofessional practice as going beyond, as being a little bit more of a unique collaboration instead of, within allied health. But that's what you guys are all doing in the network, is that my idea of interprofessional collaboration is with design, and it's unique, but it's impactful. So that's my story. But others have to do it. I'm not going to do this forever. So, yes. Yeah.
So this is just killing me. I just want to hear it. When you're looking into designing a sensory-friendly garden, I was speaking with someone else who was doing something at the Chicago Botanical Gardens, and they were talking about designing gardens for people with post-traumatic stress disorder, and how when you're designing for people with post-traumatic stress disorder, you have to make sure that you don't have places where they can't see.
Right. Yeah.
Wall.
Spaces. Yeah. Yeah.
And I know, I used to work at a school with severely impaired kids, and I know when the teachers were having problems with kids with autism, I could go in and set up visual boundaries within the room, and
Sure.
that would help the kids understand where they're supposed to be, and the division between the different activity areas.
Mm-hmm.
When you're designing a space for sensory, what are you looking at? What kind of plants are you using? I'm sure you're using certain scented ones, like you said, the lemon verbena. But are there things that make noise? You said you were putting out little instruments. I mean,
well,
what do
that
you
was,
look at?
it's also, it's, I wouldn't say it's necessarily generalizable, because, depending where you live, what the climate is, what the budget is, I mean, that impacts the plant selection. But certainly, you want plants that, that they have a range of sensory qualities. Perhaps you're going to have highly aromatic plants in one part of a garden for those who are more sensory seeking, but then you're perhaps going to have plants in a different part of the garden that are not aromatic for those who are sensory avoiders. I think that a lot of it is just really thinking about, the regulation, and how do you create these zones of regulation and opportunities. So, yeah, that's
So
kind
do
of
you typically set up plants to touch? I mean, are there specific plants that you put out just for touch?
Yeah, sure. I mean, but it varies. But yes, absolutely. You want a garden to be a place where you can have interaction, and it's not just look. I mean, that seems kind of mean, but a really good example of a sensory garden is at the Coastal Maine Botanic Garden. It's the Learner Garden of the Five Senses. Coastal Maine Botanic Garden in Booth Bay. It's a lovely garden. It's very intentionally designed. It was funded by the Lerner family, and Mrs. Lerner is visually impaired. And so it's a garden that's really particularly focused on providing opportunities for people with low vision or who are blind. But it's a fantastic garden. It has really good examples of, different levels of plants and different sensory experiences. And it's also quite accessible, and they have some really cool planting beds. And water is also used as a wayfinding tool, orient to the sound of the water to help guide you through the garden. But yeah, the Chicago Botanic Garden's a great garden. I'll actually be there next month for a conference to present. So.
Oh, let me know when you're there. I'll be down there for sailboat races, so I may be in town.
Yeah, it's for anyone who's interested in gardening, it's the American Horticultural Society National Youth Gardening Symposium. It's July 8 through 11, I think. But yeah, anyway, Coastal Maine Botanic Garden's magical. They have a great children's garden too.
Oh. So do you find when you travel, you tend to go and look at different gardens and different park spaces just for
Mhm,
interest?
mhm. Can I tell you about probably my favorite garden?
Please
It's
do.
in Chicago for all the Chicagoers or
Oh,
Southwest or Midwesterners. It's called the Caldwell Lily Pool, and it's next to the Lincoln Park Zoo. And if you don't know
oh,
where it is, you might not find it. It's kind of hidden, and it's a gem of a garden.
ooh, looks a little Frank Lloyd Wright-ish going on there.
You got it. It's gorgeous. It is gorgeous.
Wow. Oh. Is he the one who did the sculpt? No, that's Alexander Caldwell.
Right. Alfred Caldwell. There was just an exhibit at the Seattle Art Museum.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I'll be checking that out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, this is Heather,
Hi, Heather.
and I just have basically a statement, really. I've been an
Sure.
OT for over 25 years, and so I recently took some horticultural therapy classes,
Mhm.
and I got through the 3 therapy classes, but then I kind of got to a stopping point where I needed to have a certified horticultural therapist monitor me or mentor me for a lot of hours, way more than I was able to. And where I
Mhm.
live, there actually weren't any that I could find.
Mhm.
So I've recently seen that the Horticulture Therapy Association has come out with a therapeutic horticulturist, and I may be able to go that way and use it in my therapy practice instead of doing the certified horticultural
Mhm.
therapist. It's quite
Mhm.
confusing, but everything that you've talked about tonight, we talked about in these hort therapy
Mhm.
classes, and it's been wonderful.
Oh,
And
good.
I loved the sensory gardens. It was all about sound with the water and uh, rustling leaves of tall grasses, and definitely the soft petals of some
Yep.
lamb's ear type
Yes,
plants,
exactly.
and the
Yep.
visual bright flowers and dark green leaves. And so I just enjoyed this talk because it
Oh,
was right up
good.
my alley of all the things that I've just been studying.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that. And occupational therapists, man, we've got the goods to be using nature as our therapeutic intervention. Absolutely. Absolutely. And thank you for sharing that, Heather. And what a perfect name to be using nature in your practice.
Yes, they asked me what's my favorite flower, and of course I had to say heather.
Of course. Absolutely.
Hello, Amy.
Yes.
Can you please repeat where you're going to be July 8th through the 11th in Chicagoland?
Sure.
Thanks.
It's at the Chicago Botanic Garden. And ready, Karen? Ready, set. American Horticultural Society Youth Garden Symposium. I'm terrible. I don't remember the names of these things.
Say that one more time. Youth.
Of course. Youth Garden Symposium. So, yeah. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you. I have the privilege of volunteering at the Chicago Botanic Gardens, the Enabling Gardens,
Oh,
and it
that's a
is
great garden. That's a
it
great.
is amazing. And I'm sure you're familiar with the occupational therapist Barb that started it years ago. But it is, like I said, it's a true privilege to be able to volunteer there and be an OT and not only support the programming, but then for me to be refilled on a almost a weekly basis in the summer weeks. So anyway, I'm excited. I'm looking to this. I'll see what you're doing and maybe we'll cross paths.
Oh,
So
that'd be
thank
great.
you for
Don,
your,
I'm delighted that as an OT you're volunteering in the Enabling Garden. That's a great garden. Yeah.
yes. And so thank you for your example and your leadership.
Oh,
So
sure.
thank you.
Oh, you're welcome, and thanks for what you're doing. So, yeah.
There's a link for the garden
Thank
symposium in the chat.
you, Karen. You didn't know you'd be the moderator. Thank you. Oh, it should be a very fun, I think it's a very small conference, maybe just 100, a couple of hundred people. It should be really lovely. Well, for some of you on the East Coast, it's getting late.
Yeah, it is. So thank you. So Amy, I just have to say this has just been such an enjoyable time listening to you tell about your landscape career and bringing occupational therapy in. And I love hearing that, you know, people did slam doors in your face, but you just kept going, and it's just been a lot of fun and a great learning experience listening to you tonight.
It was absolutely my pleasure. Happy to come back anytime. And also feel free to reach out to me. And thank you, Karen, for providing my contact information. So it's been delightful. Thank you so much for this honor and this opportunity. And, get out in nature. It's good for you. It's all good.
Sounds wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care, everyone. Have a really lovely evening.
Yes, thanks so much, Amy.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.